Clara Whitmore pressed her father's letter against her chest and let out one slow, shaking breath. Not from grief, not from fear, but from the cold, hollow certainty that her life had just been handed to another man without her consent. She hadn't wept. She hadn't screamed. She had simply stood in the doorway of the only home she'd ever known and understood, with absolute clarity that she was no longer a daughter. She was a transaction. If that story moves something in your chest, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, follow Clara's journey all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in June, folded in thirds, sealed with her father's wax. The same deep red he used for business correspondence. Not personal letters. Business. Clara Whitmore was 23 years old, the eldest daughter of Edmund Whitmore, a man who had once held 200 acres in Chester County, Pennsylvania. A man who had once been spoken of in the same breath as names like Hartwell and Braddock. A man who, as of that Tuesday morning in the summer of 1817, owed more than he owned. She read the letter twice. Then she set it on the kitchen table, smoothed it flat with both palms, and read it a third time. You are to meet with Mr. Thomas Waverley at the Whitmore estate on the morning of June the 14th. The matter concerns the future of this family's holdings and your own position within it. Come dressed appropriately. Say nothing to your mother until after the meeting. That was all. No explanation, no softness, no apology. Clara folded the letter back along its original creases and slipped it into her apron pocket. She walked to the window. Outside, the summer morning was already thick with heat, the kind that pressed down on Chester County like a heavy hand. The elm trees unmoving, the road empty, the whole world holding its breath. She had heard the name Thomas Waverley before. Everyone had. For he's not a man you cross, her neighbor, Mrs. Pruitt, had said once over the fence. Her voice dropped low, the way women drop their voices when they meant to be heard. They say he ruined the Caldwell family. Not by violence, mind you, by patience. He simply waited until their debt was ripe, and then he collected every last acre. That sounds like business, Clara had replied. That sounds like a man who has never once in his life needed anything from another soul, Mrs. Pruitt had said. And that, my dear, is the most dangerous kind. Clara had laughed at that. She wasn't laughing now. Her father arrived home mid-morning, dusty from the road, his hat low over his eyes. He was a tall man, Edmund Whitmore, but he had been shrinking for years. Something in the shoulders, something in the way he moved through a room as if apologizing for the space he occupied. He found Clara at the kitchen table, the letter open in front of her. He stopped in the doorway. "You opened it," he said. "It was addressed to me, Papa." He came in slowly, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat down as if his bones had grown heavier on the ride home. He took off his hat and set it on the table between them. "I was going to explain." "Then explain now," Clara said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced steadiness her whole life. "Who is Thomas Waverley to you, and what has he been promised?" Her father rubbed the back of his neck. He looked at the letter. He looked at his hat. He looked everywhere except at his daughter's face. "He holds the note on this land," he said finally. "Has for 2 years. I borrowed against the acreage when the mill failed. You know that, Clara. You know we had no other—" "I know all of that." "And the note has come due. He's called it in." Edmund Whitmore's voice was thin. "I cannot pay it." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a horse shifted in the yard. A bird called once from the elm and went silent. "So you offered him me," Clara said. Her father flinched. "It isn't like that." "Papa." Her voice did not rise. That was the thing about Clara Whitmore. She had never once in her life raised her voice, and the absence of it, the absolute evenness of it, was somehow more terrible than shouting. Don't explain it as something other than what it is. You offered him a wife in exchange for the debt. Tell me I'm wrong. Edmund Whitmore said nothing. Tell me I'm wrong, she said again. He asked about you, her father said. He knew. He had asked about the family, and someone told him you were unmarried, and he proposed the arrangement himself, Clara. I did not go to him with the idea. But you agreed. Silence. You agreed, she said. Not a question now. A closing of a door. Her father looked up at last, and she saw something in his face she had not expected. Not calculation, not selfishness, but something closer to broken. He was a man who had run out of options so long ago, he could no longer remember what having options felt like. We will lose the land, he said quietly. Your mother, your sisters, we will have nothing. I have nothing left to give them. You are, Clara, you are strong, stronger than any of us. You always have been. I told myself you could manage a man like Waverley, that if anyone could. Don't, she said. Don't make this about faith in me. You made a transaction, and now you need me to honor it. He looked down at his hat. Yes, he said. Very small. Yes. Clara stood. She picked up the letter, folded it again, and walked to the window. The road outside was still empty, the heat pressed against the glass. What time does he arrive? She asked. Thomas Waverley rode in just before noon. Clara heard him from upstairs, the sound of hooves on the dry summer road, then the creak of the gate, then her mother's voice in the entry hall, rising in that particular pitch she used for important visitors, high, a little breathless, the voice she reserved for men who had power. Clara had dressed carefully, not beautifully, carefully. A dark blue cotton dress, high at the collar, plain at the cuffs. She had worn it to her cousin's burial the previous spring, and she wore it now for similar reasons. She wanted Thomas Waverley to look at her and understand immediately that she did not intend to perform for him. She came down the stairs slowly. He was standing in the entrance hall with her father, hat in hand, and he was, she noted this the way she noted everything, without expression. He was younger than she had expected. 30, perhaps. 32 at most. Tall and lean, with the kind of stillness about him that made the room seem quieter than it was. His clothes were plain for a man of his wealth. Dark coat, no ornament. His face was even, not unkind, but sealed, like a house with all its shutters drawn. He turned when he heard her on the stairs. Their eyes met. He didn't smile. Neither did she. Miss Whitmore, he said. His voice was low, unhurried. A man who never needed to fill silence. Mr. Waverley, she said, reaching the bottom of the stairs and stopping at a distance that was polite and precise, and communicated very clearly that she would not be closing it further. I am told you have business with this family. I do, he said. Her father began to speak, something about the parlor, about sitting down, about refreshment, and Clara cut across him without looking away from Waverley. I'd rather we spoke plainly, she said, if it's all the same to you. A beat of silence. Something moved behind Waverley's eyes. Not amusement exactly, but something adjacent to it. That suits me fine, he said. They sat in the parlor anyway, because her mother materialized and herded them there with the particular force of a woman who has managed difficult situations with furniture and china for 30 years. Waverly took the chair by the window. Clara sat across from him, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. Her father hovered near the door, like a man waiting for a verdict. "You may leave us, Papa," Clara said. Her father looked at Waverly. Waverly gave a small nod. Edmund Whitmore closed the door behind him. The room was quiet. Sunlight fell through the parlor window and lay across the floor between them like a dividing line. "My father tells me you hold the note on this land," Clara said. "I do." "And that it has come due?" 3 weeks past, yes. "And that your solution to his inability to pay is a proposal of marriage to me?" Waverly looked at her steadily. "That is correct." "Why?" He tilted his head slightly. "I beg your pardon?" "Why me?" Clara said. "You are a man of considerable property. You could marry any number of women with better prospects, warmer families, and more enthusiasm for the arrangement. Why a bankrupt farmer's daughter who you've never met and who has absolutely no reason to welcome the offer?" Something shifted in his expression. Not discomfort. She didn't think this man was easily made uncomfortable. More like recalibration, as if he had expected one kind of meeting and was now adjusting to another. "I have reasons," he said. "I'd like to hear them." He studied her for a moment. Then he said, "My family's estate in Virginia requires a mistress. Not in the romantic sense, in the practical one. I travel extensively on business. I need someone who can manage a household of considerable size without supervision, make decisions independently, and be trusted to represent the Waverly name without embarrassment. Those are not qualities easily found in—" He paused, chose his word carefully. "More conventional candidates. And you believe I possess them? I was told you ran your father's household after your mother's illness 3 years ago, that you negotiated his accounts with the mill creditors when he was too proud to do it himself, that you are, by every account I've received, the most capable person on this property." He said it without flattery, as a listing of facts. "I am not looking for a romantic arrangement, Miss Whitmore. I am looking for a capable partner in the management of a serious estate. Your circumstances have made you available. My offer makes your family situation solvent. It is a clean exchange." Clara sat with that for a moment. "A clean exchange," she repeated. "Yes." "You've described a business arrangement." "I have." "Then I have a question." She met his eyes. "In this arrangement, this clean exchange, what exactly am I permitted to expect from you?" Waverly blinked, just once. "I'm not certain I follow," he said. "You've told me what you want," Clara said. "I am asking what I receive beyond the cancellation of my father's debt. You want a capable household manager. You want someone to represent your name with dignity. You want independence of operation. Those are considerable services, Mr. Waverly. What is the corresponding offer to me?" The silence stretched. "Security," he said. "Financial comfort. A respected position in Virginia society." "I have a respected position here." "A declining one." "That is true," Clara said evenly. "But I am still asking what you offer me personally. Not my father, not my family's ledger. Me, Clara Whitmore. Because if this is a business arrangement, then I intend to negotiate it as one." Thomas Waverly looked at her for a long moment. She watched him the way she watched everything, with attention and without anxiety. She was not trying to impress him. She was not trying to frighten him. She was simply, as she had always been, entirely herself. "What are you asking for?" he said. "Honesty," she said. "I want your word, not in the letter of a contract, but as a man standing in front of me, that you will tell me the truth about your reasons for this marriage. All of them, not just the practical ones. She paused. Because no man offers to erase a stranger's debt for the sake of household management. There is something else, and I would like to know what it is before I give you my answer. The parlor was very still. Thomas Waverley set down the cup he'd been holding. He looked at the window for a moment, then back at her, and for the first time since he'd walked through the door, he looked not uncertain precisely, but like a man who had just discovered that the road ahead required more from him than he had prepared to give. There are conditions attached to my inheritance, he said finally. Under the terms of my father's estate, I must be married before my 33rd birthday or forfeit a significant portion of the Waverley holdings to a cousin I have no respect for and no interest in enriching. He said it plainly. No apology. My birthday is in November. I've run out of time for courtship. Clara said nothing for a moment. So it is both practical and urgent, she said. Yes. And you chose me because I was available and capable and came at a price you were already owed. He met her eyes. Yes. She appreciated that, the directness of it. She had expected deflection, elevation, the kind of dignified misdirection men used when they wanted something from a woman and didn't want to admit what it cost her. This man had simply told her the truth because she had asked for it. And something about that, just that, shifted the weight of the conversation by a fraction. All right, she said. He looked at her. All right, she said again. I will consider your offer, but I have conditions of my own. Name them. My mother and sisters are provided for, not from my father's arrangement, but from a separate agreement with me. I want their security documented and binding before any vow is spoken. Agreed. I will manage your estate as you've described, but I will not be managed in return. I make decisions for the household. I make them without approval required. Within reason, without approval required, she repeated, quiet and firm. If that condition is unacceptable, tell me now. Waverley held her gaze. Then slowly, he nodded. Agreed. And I want the truth, she said. Going forward. I don't require affection, Mr. Waverley. I don't require warmth. But I require honesty. If there are things about your life, your history, your circumstances that will affect mine, I want to know them. Not from rumors, not from servants. From you. He was quiet for a moment. That may be a more demanding condition than the others, he said. I suspect it will be, she said. Do you agree to it? He looked at her for a long time, and then he said, quietly, Yes. Clara stood. She crossed the room to the window, looked out at the summer heat shimmering off the road, at the elm trees her father had planted before she was born, at the land that was about to belong to the man standing behind her. I will give you my answer by Friday, she said. I need 2 days. Of course. She turned back to face him. One more thing, she said. Whatever else this is, whatever arrangement we strike, I am not a transaction, Mr. Waverley. I am the woman you are asking to build something with. I'd appreciate it if you remembered that distinction. Thomas Waverley looked at her across the sunlit room, and something moved in his expression that she couldn't name, something that had not been there when he'd walked in. He picked up his hat from the side table. Miss Whitmore, he said, I don't think I'll have much difficulty remembering it. He nodded once and walked to the door. She listened to his boots in the hall, the low exchange with her father, the front door, the sound of his horse on the summer road fading south toward Virginia. She stood at the window until the sound was gone entirely. Then she pressed her hand flat against the warm glass and breathed. She had 2 days to decide whether to hand her life to a stranger. But the truth, The truth she would not speak aloud to anyone, not her mother, not her sisters, not the empty summer road, was that she had already made up her mind the moment he had told her the truth. Not because the truth was comforting, but because in 23 years of watching men want things from her family, Thomas Waverley was the first one who had been honest enough to name exactly what he needed. That was something. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't love. It wasn't even kindness. But it was something. And Clara Whitmore, who had learned a long time ago not to ask for more than she could hold, decided that something was enough to start with. She turned from the window and went to find her father. She had terms to deliver. Clara told her father yes on Thursday, one day early. She didn't explain why. She simply walked into his study before breakfast, set her conditions on his desk in her own handwriting, 3 pages, clear as a deed of property, and told him to send word to Waverley. Edmund Whitmore read every line with his hands shaking slightly, and when he looked up, his eyes were wet. And Clara felt the old familiar ache of loving someone who had let you down so completely there was nothing left to be angry about. "Clara," he started. "Don't," she said. "Just send the letter." He sent it that afternoon. Waverley's reply came the following morning, written in a hand so precise it looked printed. He agreed to every condition. Not one word of negotiation, not one suggested amendment. He had simply written, "Agreed in full. I will send a carriage on the 28th. T. Waverley," and sealed it without ceremony. Her mother wept. Her sisters asked questions Clara didn't have the heart to answer honestly. The youngest, Nora, 14 and fierce in the way that only girls who haven't been broken yet can be fierce, grabbed Clara's sleeve in the upstairs hallway and said, "You don't have to go. We could find another way." "There isn't one," Clara said. "There could be." "Nora." Clara put both hands on her sister's face and looked at her squarely. "There isn't one. But what there is, what there will be, is enough. You hear me? Enough." Nora didn't look convinced. Clara hadn't expected her to be. The 28th came fast. The carriage that arrived was not what Chester County had seen before. Fine and dark, 2 matched horses, a driver who spoke to no one and waited with the patience of a man paid very well to wait. Clara had packed 1 trunk. She hugged her mother, who clung too long. She kissed her sisters. She shook her father's hand because, somehow, after everything, that was all she had left for him. And he understood it and said nothing. She climbed into the carriage. She did not look back. That was not hardness. That was survival. The Waverley estate sat 14 miles south of the Virginia border, on land that had been in the family since before the Revolution. 700 acres of summer-heavy ground, a house that had been built to last and a silence about the whole property that Clara felt the moment the carriage turned through the iron gate. Thomas Waverley was not there to meet her. A woman named Mrs. Hodge was. The housekeeper, broad-shouldered, efficient, with a face that gave nothing away, and eyes that took everything in. She greeted Clara at the door with precise courtesy, and showed her through the house with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been showing people through it for a very long time. "Mr. Waverley is expected back from Richmond by Friday," Mrs. Hodge said. Clara stopped walking. "He isn't here." "No, ma'am." "He sent for me, arranged my travel, and then left for Richmond." Mrs. Hodge's expression did not change. "He did say to extend his apologies, ma'am. The business was urgent." Clara stood in the center of a house that was not hers, in a state she had never lived in, waiting for a man she had met once, and she thought very clearly, This is what you agreed to, Clara. Own it. Show me the household accounts, she said. Mrs. Hodge blinked. Just once. I beg your pardon? The accounts, the ledgers, whatever documents govern the running of this property. Clara set her traveling bag down on the entry table. Mr. Waverley asked me here to manage this estate. I cannot begin to understand what it needs until I understand what it has. If he is in Richmond, then I will start without him. A long pause. Yes, ma'am, Mrs. Hodge said finally. He came back on Friday, midday. Clara heard him before she saw him. Horses in the yard, a door, his voice giving brief instructions to the stable hand. She was in the study, deep in the third ledger, and she did not get up. She let him find her. He filled the doorway and stopped when he saw her at his desk. Miss Whitmore, he said. Mrs. Waverley, she corrected, without looking up. We signed the papers in Chester County before I left. I believe that makes it official. A pause. So it does. She closed the ledger and looked up. He looked the same as she remembered, sealed, still, nothing offered and nothing withdrawn. But there was road dust on his coat, and something tired in his posture that he was working to conceal. You weren't here, she said. I explained. You sent a letter explaining. That isn't the same as explaining. She kept her voice even. She always kept her voice even. I arrived to a house full of staff who didn't know what to make of me, Mr. Waverley, because you had not told them I was coming as anything other than a guest. Mrs. Hodge nearly put me in the East Wing room. That's the finest room in the house. It is not your room, Clara said, which told me everything your staff had been told about the nature of this arrangement. The study was quiet. He came in fully and closed the door behind him. I will speak to Mrs. Hodge, he said. I already have, Clara said. She has been entirely professional since. But I want you to understand something, Mr. Waverley. You said you needed a capable partner. Partners are not met by housekeepers. They are met at the door. He looked at her. You're right, he said. I apologize. She hadn't expected that. Not the speed of it, not the simplicity. Most men in her experience apologized the way they paid debts, reluctantly, and in the smallest denomination possible. He had simply said it. All right, she said. Sit down. I have questions about your accounts. He sat. He was a difficult man to read, she discovered over the first 2 weeks, but not in the way she had anticipated. She had expected coldness. What she found instead was distance. A man who was fully present in every practical sense and entirely absent in every personal one. He answered her questions about the estate with precision and patience. He deferred to her household decisions without argument. He was, by every measurable standard, exactly what he had promised to be. And yet there were things he didn't say, doors in his conversation that closed before she could see what was behind them. Questions he answered in ways that were technically complete and somehow hollow. The first crack came at dinner, 9 days in. They had developed a habit of eating together, not from sentiment, but from practicality. The evenings were when estate matters were easiest to discuss without staff interruptions. Clara had brought her own notes. Waverley had brought nothing, but he remembered everything without writing it down, which was either impressive or unsettling, depending on the day. The Northfield hasn't been properly seeded in 3 seasons, Clara said. No. That's not an accident. That's a decision. He reached for his glass. It's a postponement. Of what? Of an investment I haven't yet decided whether to make. You own the land, she said. What's the decision? He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, actually considering. Whether to hold it or sell it. Why would you sell it? The land itself is profitable, if managed. I know that. Then what? Clara. He said her name. First time, no title, and she felt it register somewhere in her chest without permission. There are parts of this estate's situation that I haven't fully explained to you. She set down her fork. Then explain them. He looked at her across the table. Not tonight, he said, and before she could push back, there are things I need to arrange before I can speak to them plainly. I am not hiding them from you. I am not ready to address them yet. Those are different things. You promised me honesty, she said. I promised you honesty, he agreed. I am telling you honestly that I am not yet ready. That is also honesty. She held his gaze for a long moment. You have 1 week, she said. Something crossed his face, not quite a smile. The shape of one, perhaps, the memory of one. 1 week, he said. She found out in 4 days. Not from him. She had been in the East Wing, going through linen inventories. Mrs. Hodge had let things slide in a few areas, not from negligence, but from a household that had been understaffed for longer than anyone had said aloud. When she heard voices in the corridor below, Waverly's voice, and the man she didn't recognize, and the words came up through the floor of the old house with a particular clarity that old houses permit to conversations that are meant to be private. The Caldwell matter. Settled, I told you. Thomas, it is not settled. If the county clerk releases those records, everything you've built here will stand. Waverly's voice. Flat. Hard in a way she hadn't heard before. I said it will stand. And if she finds out, she won't. You brought a woman into this house. I brought a wife into this house. For reasons you know, and I have not asked your opinion on. Thomas, enough. 1 word. No heat in it. Just finality. The kind that came from a man who had ended conversations this way so many times, the other person already knew there was no point continuing. A door. Silence. Clara stood perfectly still in the East Wing with a linen inventory in her hands. If she finds out, she had married a man who was keeping something from her. Something large enough that an associate had ridden to the estate to warn him. Something connected to a name she had heard before. Caldwell. The family from Chester County. The family her neighbor Mrs. Pruitt had mentioned. The one Thomas Waverly had been said to have ruined. He simply waited until their debt was ripe, and then he collected every last acre. She set the inventory down on the nearest surface. She walked downstairs, through the hallway, and knocked on the study door. Come in. She opened the door. The man from the corridor, older, thick-set, lawyer's clothes, looked up from the chair across from Waverly's desk. Waverly looked up from behind it. His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened in a way she was beginning to recognize as the closest he came to alarm. Clara, he said. I heard part of your conversation, she said. She walked in and closed the door behind her. She looked at the man in the chair. I don't know who you are. Robert Kane, the man said, glancing at Waverly. I am Mr. Waverly's attorney, Waverly said. Clara, this isn't the time. You owe me a week of explanation, and you have 4 days left, she said. But what I heard just now suggests 4 days may be too long. She walked to the empty chair beside Kane and sat down. Tell me about the Caldwell matter. The room went very still. Robert Kane looked at Waverly with the expression of a man who wanted explicit permission to exist. Waverly looked at Clara, and she saw it then. Not guilt exactly, not fear, but something older and heavier than either. The look of a man who had been carrying something a very long time and had just discovered it might be heavier than he'd calculated. Robert, he said slowly, give us the room. Kane left without another word. The silence after the door closed was the particular kind that precedes something that cannot be unsaid. Thomas Waverley stood. He walked to the window. She noticed he always moved when he was thinking, always put physical space between himself and whatever he was processing. And then he turned back to face her. "The Caldwell family," he said, "held land adjacent to this estate for 40 years. Jeremiah Caldwell and my father were not friends, but aligned. When my father died, the terms of several shared land agreements became contested. Jeremiah Caldwell claimed deeds to 3 parcels that my father's estate record showed as Waverley land." "And?" Clara said. "And the records in question were damaged in a courthouse fire in 1814. A pause. "Damaged in a way that was not accidental." The room seemed to hold its breath. "Go on," she said. "The fire destroyed Caldwell's documentation. His claims could not be proven. The land stayed with this estate." Waverley held her gaze without flinching. "There are people who believe I had a hand in the fire." Clara said nothing. "I did not," he said. "I want to be absolutely clear about that. I was 19 years old and in Philadelphia when it happened. But my father's estate manager at the time was a man named Prentice, and Prentice had reasons of his own to protect Waverley land, and what he may have done, what he almost certainly did, I did not know about until 3 years after my father's death." He stopped. "By which time Caldwell was already ruined and gone, and the land had been in my name for 6 years. The quiet stretched between them. "You benefited from it," Clara said. "Yes." "Even though you didn't order it?" "Yes." "And the county records?" "There are records from Prentice's household that Kane believes may surface. Letters. If they do, the question of whether I knew becomes complicated." "Did you know?" Clara asked, directly. No softness in it. Thomas Waverley looked at her, and she understood, watching him, that this was the question he had been carrying. Not the legal exposure, not the risk to the estate. This. Whether or not his silence, after the fact, was the same as participation. Whether or not undoing a wrong made him responsible for it. "I told myself I didn't," he said. "For a long time. And then one day I stopped lying to myself and admitted that I had suspected and chosen not to ask questions, because asking questions would have complicated things I wasn't prepared to complicate." He said it with the flat precision of a man who had recited a confession so many times in his own head that the words had worn smooth. "So no, I did not know. And yes, I should have known. And I have lived with the difference between those two things for years." Clara sat very still. This was the secret. Not a crime. Something worse. A choice made in silence, and the weight of it carried forward into every acre of this estate, into every year of a life built on land that had come at someone else's cost. "The Caldwells," she said. "What happened to them?" "Jeremiah died in 1815. His wife and daughters moved to her sister's family in Maryland. They are not destitute, but reduced, significantly." "And you've done nothing to address it?" He said nothing. "Thomas." His name, first time, deliberate. "You've done nothing." "I didn't know what to do that wouldn't destroy everything without restoring anything," he said. "Money sent anonymously looks like a conscience, not justice. Making any formal admission—" "I'm not asking about formal admissions," Clara said. "I'm asking what you've done for people your silence harmed." The question landed the way she intended, not as an accusation, but as something more durable. A reckoning. He looked at her. "Nothing," he said. "I have done nothing." She stood. She walked to the window he'd abandoned and looked out at the land. At the broad, summer-heavy acres of the Waverley estate. At the 700 acres of everything he had protected. At all of it sitting there in the heat, like a testament to a decision made in silence by a young man who had not asked the question he should have asked. "I want to help them," she said. He went very still. "Not anonymously," she said. "Not in a way that protects your name. A real arrangement, a real correction, as much as one is possible." She turned to face him. "That is my condition, new condition, added to the others." "Clara, you said you wanted a capable partner," she said. "A capable partner is telling you right now that you cannot build a marriage on land you're ashamed of without addressing the shame. I won't live in a house that carries a debt like this and pretend it isn't there." She held his eyes. "Help the Caldwell family, whatever form makes sense. And let me help you figure out what that form is." Thomas Waverley looked at her for a long time. Something in his face was different than it had been. Not broken. He wasn't that kind of man. She was already certain of that. But something had been loosened. Some piece of the sealed, shuttered thing he carried had come slightly open, and the air getting in wasn't destroying anything. It was just air. "Why would you do that?" he said quietly. "You've been in this house 2 weeks." "Because you told me the truth," she said. "And because the truth deserves something better than more silence." She walked toward the door. "I'll expect you at dinner. We have a great deal to discuss." She left him standing in the study with the summer light and 700 acres and the particular, unfamiliar feeling of a man who had just been offered something he hadn't known he was missing. Not absolution. Something harder and more honest than that. A direction forward. The plan to help the Caldwell family was not simple, and Clara did not pretend it would be. She spent 3 days with the estate ledgers and Robert Kane's files before she said another word to Waverley about it. She needed to understand the full shape of the thing before she could speak to it intelligently. Not because she doubted herself, but because she had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous moment in any difficult situation was the moment when someone acted from emotion before they understood the facts. She had seen her father do it 100 times. She had sworn she never would. On the 4th morning, she came to breakfast with a single sheet of paper and set it beside Waverley's coffee cup. He looked at it, then at her. "What is this?" he said. "A proposal," she said. "Sit down." He sat. He read. She watched his face the way she always watched faces, looking not for the first reaction, which was automatic, but the second one, which was real. He read it twice. Then he set it down. "You want to establish a land trust," he said. "2 parcels from the north acreage," she said. "The ones that have been sitting unseeded for 3 seasons because you couldn't decide whether to hold or sell them. Transferred into a managed trust with income directed to the Caldwell family in Maryland. Not a gift, not charity. A correction structured as a legal arrangement so that neither party has to name what it actually is in public." "That protects me," he said. "It also protects them," she said. "Eleanor Caldwell is 61 years old and living in her sister's spare room. She doesn't need your confession. She needs income." Clara picked up her coffee. "You can have your conscience and your practicality both, Thomas. That's what the structure is for." He was quiet for a long moment. "Kane will say this creates a paper trail that raises questions. Kane's job is to protect you from legal exposure. My job is to help you build something you can actually live in." She met his eyes. "Those are different jobs. I am not asking you to choose between them. I am asking you to trust that I understand the difference." Waverley picked up the paper again. He held it for a moment, then set it down precisely. "Draw it up," he said. "I'll sign it." She had expected negotiation. She had prepared for resistance. What she got instead was 2 words and a decision, delivered with the same flat directness he used for everything. And she felt something shift. Not dramatically, not in a way she would have named aloud, but something, a small and careful thing, like a door opening just enough to let in light. What she had not anticipated was the town. Waverly had told her the estate was 14 miles from the nearest settlement of any size, a Virginia crossroads town called Hallows Ford, population perhaps 400, with a general store, a church, a tavern, and the particular social architecture of a place where everyone had known everyone else's business for 3 generations. He had described it clinically, the way he described most things, as if the social geography of a place was simply a set of facts to be accounted for. He had not mentioned that the town had opinions about his wife. Clara discovered this on a Wednesday in mid-July, when she rode into Hallows Ford with Mrs. Hodge to arrange accounts at the general store. A routine matter, nothing of consequence. The store was run by a man named Aldous Webb, heavyset and sharp-eyed, who had presumably been running the Waverly Estate store accounts for years, and had therefore developed, over that time, a very comfortable sense of his own importance to the arrangement. He looked at Clara the way men like him always looked at women who arrived with authority they hadn't been consulted about, with a smile that was perfect on the surface and cold underneath. "Mrs. Waverly," he said, "we heard Mr. Waverly had remarried." "He did," Clara said pleasantly. "I'm here to review the store accounts and adjust the credit arrangements going forward." A beat. "Adjust," he said. "The current arrangement bills monthly against an open credit line with no itemized record," Clara said. She set her own ledger copy on the counter between them. "I'd like to move to a weekly itemized account instead. It's simpler to manage and easier to audit." Webb's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. "Mr. Waverly never found the current arrangement difficult to manage." "Mr. Waverly wasn't managing the household accounts," Clara said. "I am, and I prefer itemized records." She held his gaze, not aggressive, not apologetic, simply present. "Is that going to be a problem?" Behind her, she heard one of the women near the fabric counter go very still. Webb looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his own ledger. "No problem at all, Mrs. Waverly," he said. She bought what she'd come for, settled the necessary arrangements, and walked back outside into the summer heat. Mrs. Hodge fell into step beside her. "You should know," Mrs. Hodge said, her voice low and even, "that Mr. Webb is Aldous Webb. His wife is Margaret Webb. Margaret Webb is the sister of James Garrett, who is the county clerk." Clara stopped walking. "The county clerk," she said. "Yes, ma'am." The county clerk. The man who held whatever records Robert Kane had been worried about. The man whose office determined what documents surfaced and what documents stayed buried. "And Margaret Webb," Clara said carefully. "What does she do with the information she gets from her husband's store?" Mrs. Hodge looked at her with those quiet, accounting eyes. "She shares it," she said, "with everyone." Clara stood on the street of Hallows Ford in the July heat and understood, with sudden and complete clarity, that she had not walked into a simple errand. She had walked into a web that had been building around the Waverly name for years, and the woman at the center of it had just watched her reorganize the store accounts. She walked back to her horse, mounted, and rode home without hurry, but her mind was moving very fast. She told Waverly that evening. He listened without interrupting, What she had come to understand was how he processed things he considered serious. He went still, and he listened, and he gave nothing away until he'd turned it over completely. She had learned to read the quality of his silences. This one was tight. "Garrett," he said when she finished, "you know him." "I know of him. Kane has mentioned the name." He stood from the table and walked to the window. That habit again, that need for movement. If Webb is feeding information to Garrett's household, then anything you said or did today in that store will be in Margaret Webb's parlor by tonight, and in James Garrett's ear by morning. "I know," Clara said. "I didn't say anything that could be used." "You reorganized the accounts," he said. "That alone tells anyone watching that the household is under new management that is reviewing records." He turned back to face her. "Garrett may interpret that as preparation for something. A legal challenge. A document search." "Are you worried?" she said. He held her gaze. "I am cautious." "Those aren't the same thing." "No," he agreed. "They aren't." "Thomas," she folded her hands on the table. "Is there something in Garrett's records, actual documents, not rumors, that could be used against this estate?" The pause that followed was not long, but it was long enough. "Kane believes there may be letters," he said, "from Prentice to a third party, documenting the fire, and Prentice's reasons for it." "And if those letters name this estate?" "They would name my father, possibly me by inheritance." "Inheritance of guilt," Clara said quietly. He said nothing. "Are those letters in Garrett's possession?" "We don't know. Kane believes they may be in private hands, someone who has been holding them as leverage. If that person is connected to Garrett, or if Garrett is the one holding them, then Webb's wife walking into her parlor tonight with news of a new mistress reviewing estate accounts, Clara said, may shake something loose. She could see him working through it. He was a man who thought in systems, in cause and effect, in chains of consequence, and she could almost watch the chain extending in his mind. "We need to know what Garrett has," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "We do." She paused. "I have an idea about that." He looked at her. "The Women's Society at the Hallows Ford Church meets on Friday," she said. "Margaret Webb will be there. Every woman of consequence in this county will be there." She met his eyes. "I intend to attend." Waverly stared at her. "Clara, I am not going to interrogate anyone," she said patiently. "I am going to introduce myself, drink whatever they serve, and listen. Women's societies are the most efficient intelligence networks in any county in this country. And Margaret Webb is already talking about me. I would rather be in the room when she does it." He looked at her for a long moment. "That is either very smart or very dangerous," he said. "It's both," she said. "Most useful things are." She walked into that Friday meeting like she owned the county, and she did it wearing her plainest dress. There were 11 women. They ranged from Margaret Webb, 50-ish, composed, pearl earrings, a smile like a lock, to a young woman named Delia Farnsworth, who couldn't have been more than 19, and who looked at Clara with undisguised curiosity. They were polite. They were welcoming. They were, every single one of them, watching her the way you watch a card player whose hand you haven't seen yet. "We were so pleased to hear Mr. Waverly had married," said a woman named Hattie Birch, whose voice had the particular warmth of someone who means the opposite. "It was rather sudden," Margaret Webb said pleasantly. "The best decisions often are," Clara said, equally pleasant, and reached for a biscuit. "My father always said that a man who deliberates too long over a good thing usually talks himself out of it." A small laugh around the room, not all of it genuine. "Where is your family from, Mrs. Waverly?" Margaret Webb asked. Chester County, Pennsylvania, Clara said. My father held land there. I grew up managing a smaller estate than this one, so the adjustment has been mostly scale. Chester County, Webb said. My brother mentioned that Mr. Waverly had some business interests up that way. Your brother, the county clerk. He did, Clara said easily. That's actually how we met. Thomas, Mr. Waverly, came to speak with my father, and the conversation expanded. She smiled. These things have a way of doing that. They do, Webb said. Her eyes were very careful. And your family, your father's estate, is it well? It's in good hands, Clara said, which was technically true. She stayed 2 hours. She said very little of substance. She listened to everything. And by the time she left, she had formed 2 opinions that she trusted entirely. The first was that Margaret Webb was clever, disciplined, and had been waiting a long time for something to use against the Waverly name. The second was that young Delia Farnsworth, who had said almost nothing the entire meeting, had watched Margaret Webb the entire time with an expression that was not admiration. It was something quieter, something that looked like wariness. On the way out, Clara slowed beside Delia Farnsworth and said, quietly enough that no one else could hear, You live near the Garrett property, don't you? Delia looked at her with startled eyes. My family's land borders it, yes, ma'am. I thought so, Clara said, as if this were a simple observation. I'd love to call on your mother sometime, if she'd welcome the visit. Delia held her gaze for a beat. She would, she said. She very much would. She told Waverly nothing about Delia Farnsworth. Not yet. She needed to understand what the girl knew before she turned it into anything. But she carried the conversation home carefully, the way you carry something fragile, aware of its weight, aware of what it might be. What she had not anticipated was what was waiting for her at the estate when she returned. Robert Kane's horse was tied outside. She walked in to find him in the study with Waverly, both of them standing, the kind of standing men did when the news was too bad to sit through. Kane had a letter in his hand. He looked at her, then at Waverly. She should hear this, Waverly said. Kane held out the letter. Clara took it and read it. It was brief, unsigned, 6 lines, written in a hand that had tried and failed to disguise itself as plain. The letters from Prentice are in Garrett's possession. He has been approached by a party interested in the Waverly estate holdings. He intends to present them to the county court within the month. You have until August's end to respond. After that, the matter will be beyond private resolution. Clara read it twice. Then she set it on the desk. Who sent this? She said. We don't know, Kane said. A warning, Waverly said. Someone who knows what Garrett has and wants us to know we're running out of time. Someone who doesn't want Garrett to succeed, Clara said. Both men looked at her. This isn't neutral information, she said. A neutral party doesn't warn you. A neutral party does nothing. This person wants you to move before Garrett does, which means they have a stake in the outcome that isn't Garrett's stake. She looked at Waverly. Who benefits if this matter is resolved privately rather than in court? He was already thinking it. She could see it. The Caldwells, he said slowly. Or someone acting on their behalf, Clara said. Someone who knows that a court proceeding would be public, damaging, and ultimately unresolvable. That the letters might prove your father's manager guilty, but wouldn't return an acre to Eleanor Caldwell or restore a single thing her family lost. She picked up the letter again. A court case gives Garrett power, and the Caldwells nothing. A private resolution gives the Caldwells something real, Waverly said. Which is what we were already planning to give them, Clara said. She set the letter down. Someone knows about the land trust proposal. The room went very still. That's impossible, Kane said. I only drafted the preliminary papers 2 days ago. And who was in this office when you did? Clara said. Kane opened his mouth, closed it. She looked at Waverly. One of your staff, she said. Not an accusation, a fact. He looked at her with something she was beginning to recognize. Not surprise, but the particular look of a man realizing that the person across from him is 3 steps ahead, and has been for some time. You already know who it is, he said quietly. I have a thought, she said. I need one conversation to confirm it. She picked up her gloves from the table. Give me until Monday. Clara, Waverly started. Trust me, she said. Simply, directly. The way he had trusted her 2 weeks ago, when she had walked into his study and sat down without being invited. He held her gaze. Something moved through his expression. Something that had no name yet. Something that was still becoming, the way a season becomes before it announces itself. Monday, he said. She nodded and walked out. Behind her, she heard Kane say under his breath, Where did you find her? And she heard Waverly say very quietly, Chester County. She walked down the hall and out into the summer evening, the heat still pressing close, the air thick with the smell of July and Virginia and everything that was at stake. The estate, the Caldwells, the letters, the web that had been built slowly and carefully around a man who had spent years believing the walls he'd built were protection when they were, in fact, a cage. She had 4 days. She intended to use all of them. The person Clara needed to speak to was Delia Farnsworth. She had been turning it over since Friday. The way the girl had said nothing for 2 hours in that parlor, the way her eyes had tracked Margaret Webb with the steady, careful attention of someone who had been watching a threat for a long time and had learned to do it without being seen. Clara had met that kind of watchfulness before. She had practiced it herself. It was not the look of an innocent bystander. It was the look of someone who knew something and had not yet decided what to do with it. She sent a note to the Farnsworth property on Saturday morning. A simple social call, nothing in the language that could be read as anything other than neighborly. She asked if she might come for tea on Sunday afternoon. The reply came back within the hour, written in a young woman's hand, careful and deliberate. We would be very pleased to receive you, Mrs. Waverly. Waverly said nothing when she told him where she was going. He looked at her for a moment over his coffee cup, and she could see him calculating the same things she had already calculated, arriving at the same place. Be careful, he said. I'm always careful, she said. That isn't the same as being safe, he said. She looked at him. It was the closest thing to personal concern he had expressed in the 6 weeks she had been in his house, and it landed somewhere she hadn't expected. Quiet and specific, like a hand placed briefly on a shoulder. She held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. I know, she said. I'll be back by supper. Mrs. Farnsworth was a small, sharp woman of 50 who had the manner of someone who had survived a great deal by paying close attention and speaking only when it mattered. She served good tea and asked polite questions about Chester County and said nothing of consequence for the first 40 minutes, which Clara respected. You didn't hand things to strangers. You waited to see what they were made of first. Delia sat beside her mother and watched Clara with those careful eyes. It was Clara who moved first. Mrs. Farnsworth, she said, setting down her cup, I'll be honest with you, because I think you're a woman who prefers it. The older woman's hands stilled on her own cup. I am, she said. I believe your daughter knows something about the Garrett property and the documents James Garrett currently holds. I believe she has known for some time, and I believe she has not spoken about it because she had no one safe to speak to. Clara kept her voice even, warm but direct. I may be wrong. If I am, tell me so, and we'll finish our tea, and I'll go home, and this conversation never happened. But if I'm right, I want you to know that I am not here to use what she knows against her or your family. I'm here because I think there may be a way to resolve this that protects everyone who deserves protecting. The room was very quiet. Mrs. Farnsworth looked at her daughter. Delia looked at Clara. Something in her face had shifted. The watchfulness still there, but underneath it now, something that looked like relief. The particular relief of a person who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just been offered a place to set it down. Garrett didn't find those letters himself, Delia said. Clara waited. Someone gave them to him, Delia said. 2 years ago. A man named Harlan Voss. He was Prentice's nephew. He'd had the letters since Prentice died, and he'd been trying to figure out what they were worth. She folded her hands in her lap. Voss lives 3 miles from here. He and my father had a land dispute last year. During that dispute, Voss told him directly, that he had proof that could bring down the Waverly estate if he chose to use it. He said it as a threat, a demonstration of power. He wasn't threatening us specifically, he was just showing off what he had. And your father? Clara started. My father died in March, Delia said quietly. Clara absorbed that. I'm sorry. He told me about it before he died, Delia said. He said he didn't know what to do with the information, that if Voss had given the letters to Garrett, then Garrett was already planning to use them, and getting involved would only make us a target. She looked at Clara steadily. But I've been sitting with it for 4 months, and I can't just let it happen. Whatever Mr. Waverly's father did, whatever Prentice did, that's not Thomas Waverly. And a man losing everything his family built because of someone else's crime. She stopped. It's not right. Clara looked at this 19-year-old girl who had carried this alone through her father's illness and death and 4 months of summer silence. And she felt something open in her chest. Something that had nothing to do with the estate or the letters or Garrett. Just a recognition, clean and uncomplicated, of courage in someone who had every reason not to show any. Thank you, Clara said, simply, directly. Delia nodded. Tell me everything you know about Harlan Voss, Clara said. She was back at the estate by 4 o'clock, 2 hours before supper. Waverly was in the study. She walked in and closed the door and stayed standing because she needed to move through what she was about to say quickly. Harlan Voss, she said, Prentice's nephew. He gave the letters to Garrett 2 years ago. Garrett has been holding them, waiting for the right moment or the right offer. Voss told a neighbor about the letters as a threat during a land dispute, which means he talked about them, which means Garrett knows Voss talked, which means Garrett's position is not as clean as he thinks it is. Waverly was already sitting forward. If Voss disclosed the existence of the letters outside of any legal proceeding, then Garrett's use of them becomes complicated, Clara said. He can't claim they came to him through proper channels if the man who gave them to him has been waving them around in private disputes. She finally sat down. But that's Kane's territory, not mine. What I care about is this. Voss gave those letters to Garrett, but that doesn't mean Garrett is Voss's ally. They're using each other. Voss wanted money or influence. Garrett wants the estate holdings, or access to them, or whatever a county clerk dreams about when he looks at 700 acres he can't touch. She looked at Waverly. If those 2 men are using each other, they can be separated. Waverly looked at her with an expression she had come to know over 6 weeks, the one where he was processing something he found genuinely unexpected. You want to go to Voss directly. Kane should, she said, not us. If Kane approaches Voss with an offer, a real one, not a threatening one, before Garrett moves in court, Voss has a choice between taking something real now and gambling on Garrett's timing and competence. She paused. Men like Voss don't gamble on other men's competence. They bet on their own. You'd pay him, Waverly said. His voice was carefully neutral. I'd offer him fair value for land he may have a legitimate inheritance claim on, Clara said. Prentice worked this estate for 30 years. If there's a genuine grievance somewhere in that family's history, addressing it is not payment for silence. It's correction. She held his gaze. Those are different things. I want you to be clear on which one we're doing. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You've thought about this longer than 2 days. I've thought about this since the first night you told me about the Caldwells, she said. Because the Caldwell situation and the Voss situation have the same root. Your father's estate manager made decisions that protected this land at other people's expense, and those people have been carrying the weight of those decisions ever since. She leaned forward slightly. I am not asking you to accept guilt for what your father's man did. I am asking you to accept responsibility for what you can still correct. Those are also different things. Thomas Waverly looked at her for a long time. His face was doing something complicated. Not quite emotion, not quite resistance. Something in between. A man who had built his life around the distinction between what he was responsible for and what had simply happened to him. Discovering that the woman across from him was dismantling that distinction with complete gentleness and no mercy whatsoever. All right, he said finally. All right, she said. Send for Kane tonight. Kane arrived Monday morning. He listened to everything Clara laid out with the expression of a man who had spent 20 years practicing professional neutrality and was finding it difficult to maintain. When she finished, he looked at Waverly. She's right about Voss, he said. If he disclosed those letters in a private dispute, his testimony in any proceeding becomes unreliable. Garrett needs him credible. If we move first, Waverly said. Kane looked at Clara with an expression she recognized. It was the same expression Mrs. Hodge had worn the first morning when Clara had asked for the household ledgers. The expression of someone recalibrating. I'll ride to the Voss property this afternoon. Take the land trust paperwork with you, Clara said. The north parcel documentation. Let him see it's real before you make any offer. Men don't believe in intentions. They believe in paper. Kane nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. He left within the hour. The house settled into a waiting quiet that was different from the silences Clara had grown accustomed to. This was a tension with direction, not the closed, turned inward tension of a man who kept everything sealed, but something forward-facing, something that had been set in motion and was now moving, whether anyone was ready or not. She was at the kitchen table going through staff schedules when Waverly appeared in the doorway. Can I ask you something? He said. She looked up. He almost never asked permission for anything. Yes. He came in and sat down across from her. Not at his desk, not with paperwork between them. Just across the kitchen table in the plain midday light. He looked at her with the directness she had come to rely on, but there was something different underneath it today. Something that was working toward the surface. Why do you care? He said. She waited. The Caldwells, he said. Voss. The Farnsworth girl. You've been in this house 6 weeks and you are... He stopped, chose a word carefully. Fighting for this estate harder than I have in years. And I'm asking honestly, Clara, not as a test, not as suspicion. I genuinely want to know. Why? She considered the question. She gave it the weight it deserved, instead of reaching for the easy answer. "Because it matters what we build," she said finally, "not just what we keep. You could hold this estate for the rest of your life and never address any of what your father's man did, and legally you'd be within your rights, and nobody could take anything from you." She held his gaze. "But that's not the same as building something worth having. I didn't come here to manage a house that's ashamed of itself. I came here to make something real. And you can't make something real on a foundation that has rot in it." She paused. "I am also practical enough to know that Garrett would have come for this estate regardless of the moral dimension. Cleaning the foundation protects you legally and correctly. The two things align." "They do," he said. "But that's not the whole answer." She looked at him. "No," she said, "it isn't." He waited. "I made a decision," she said, "when I said yes to this arrangement. And I decided a long time ago that if I made a decision, I was going to make it completely. Not halfway. Not with one foot still back in Chester County." She met his eyes. "This is my home now. That means what happens here matters to me the way home matters. And I do not leave the houses I live in worse than I found them." Something in his face broke open. Not dramatically. Thomas Waverley was not a dramatic man. But there was a fracture, a small, clean fracture in that sealed, shuttered surface. And what came through it was not weakness. It was something older than strength. Something that had been locked up so long it had forgotten it had a name. He said, very quietly, "I haven't had that. Someone who—" He stopped. "I know," she said. She didn't push further. He nodded once, and then he stood, and the moment sealed itself back up the way it always did with him, neatly and without fuss. But it had happened, and they both knew it had happened, and that knowing sat between them like the beginning of something neither of them had the language for yet. Kane came back Tuesday evening. Waverley and Clara were both in the study when he rode in. They heard him on the stairs, and neither of them said anything, just waited, and Kane opened the door with the face of a man who has just handled something more difficult than he expected, and come through it. "Voss took the offer," he said. Waverley let out a slow breath. "He has conditions," Kane said. He looked at Clara. "He wants a witness to the agreement who is not employed by this estate." "The Farnsworth family," Clara said immediately. Kane stared at her. "How did you—" "Because Voss already told them about the letters," she said. "They're the only independent party he trusts enough to satisfy whatever sense of self-preservation he has left." She stood. "I'll send a note to Delia Farnsworth tonight." "There's something else," Kane said. The way he said it stopped both of them. "Garrett knows," Kane said. "I don't know how. Someone from Voss's household, maybe. Or someone on the road who recognized my horse. But I was followed back from the Voss property, and there was a message waiting for me at the inn in Hallows Ford." He held out a folded paper. Waverley took it. Clara came to stand beside him, and they read it together. It was from James Garrett. 3 sentences. "The matter of the Prentice letters will be presented to the county court on Thursday of next week. Any private arrangements made prior to that date will be considered evidence of intent to suppress legal proceedings. I suggest the Waverley estate retain appropriate counsel." Thursday. 8 days. Clara said, "He moved the timeline." "He knows we're trying to close this before he can act," Waverley said. His voice was flat, hard. The Richmond voice she'd heard through the floor that first week. "He's cutting off the exit." "Can he do that?" she asked Kane. "He can file," Kane said carefully. "Whether the court accepts the letters as evidence, whether there's a legitimate legal proceeding to be made, that's another question. But the filing itself creates a public record, and a public record creates the scandal regardless of the outcome," Clara finished. She stood very still, 8 days. The land trust, Voss's agreement, all of it contingent on resolving this before it went public. Before Margaret Webb's parlor became a courthouse. Before the Waverly name became a question mark on every piece of paper in the county. "What does Garrett actually want?" she said. Both men looked at her. "He's a county clerk," she said. "He makes a county clerk's salary. He's been holding these letters for 2 years without acting. That's not a man on a moral crusade. That's a man waiting for the right price." She looked at Kane. "Has anyone actually asked him what he wants?" The silence told her the answer. "Nobody has sat down with this man and asked him directly what he wants," she said. "Clara," Waverly started. "I'm not suggesting we pay him to stay silent," she said. "I'm suggesting we find out what his actual stake is before we assume we know. Because right now we're building a defense against a threat we haven't fully understood." She looked at Waverly. "What does James Garrett need?" And then Waverly said something that reframed everything. "His father," he said slowly. "His father worked this land, before my father bought the eastern parcels. The Garrett family farmed a portion of what is now the East Field for a generation before the land changed hands." Clara stared at him. "You knew this," she said. "I knew the family name was associated with the land history," he said. I hadn't connected it to the clerk's office, to the letters, to any of this." "Thomas," her voice was very quiet, "James Garrett isn't trying to destroy this estate out of political ambition." He met her eyes. "He's trying to get back something his family lost," she said. The room went absolutely still, and in that stillness, everything that had seemed like an enemy's attack rearranged itself into something else entirely. Into the shape of a grief that had been looking for a door for 20 years, and had finally found one in the form of a dead man's letters and a county clerk's authority, and 8 days to Thursday. Clara picked up her gloves. "I need to speak to James Garrett," she said. "Not Kane, not you, me." "That is," Waverly started. "The only thing that makes sense," she said. "You send a lawyer and he sees a threat. You go yourself and he sees a man protecting his position. I go," she paused, "and he sees someone who has no history with his family's loss. Someone who might actually listen." She looked at him. "Let me go." Waverly looked at her. That look again. The fracture. The light getting through. A man who had spent 32 years making every decision alone, slowly, carefully, learning to let someone stand beside him. "Take Mrs. Hodge," he said. "Don't go alone." "I wasn't going to," she said. She walked to the door, and then she stopped, and she turned back, and she looked at him across the study, where all of this had begun weeks ago. The letters, the truth, the land trust, all of it. And she said, "Whatever happens Thursday, whatever Garrett does, I want you to know something." He waited. "I am not sorry I came here," she said. "Whatever else is true, that part is true." Thomas Waverly looked at her, and the fracture in his face widened just enough that she could see what was underneath it clearly for the first time. Not calculation, not distance, not the careful management of a man who had never trusted anyone enough to be seen. Just a man, standing in the house he'd inherited, and the life he'd built, and the silence he'd chosen, looking at the woman who had walked into all of it 6 weeks ago and refused, simply, completely, without drama, to let any of it stay the way she'd found it. "I know," he said. She nodded once and walked out into the evening. Thursday was 8 days away. She had work to do. Clara did not sleep well the night before she went to see James Garrett. She lay in the dark and ran through it the way she ran through everything, methodically, honestly, without the comfort of pretending she knew how it would go. She had been wrong before, not often, but enough to know that certainty was a luxury she could not afford, walking into a conversation with a man who had been nursing a grievance for 20 years and had finally found the leverage to act on it. What she had was not certainty. What she had was clarity. And in her experience, clarity was more useful. She rose before the house woke up. She dressed without hurry. She came downstairs to find Waverly already at the kitchen table with coffee, and no expression on his face that she could read, which meant he hadn't slept either. He pushed a cup toward her without a word. She sat down and drank it. "If this goes badly," he said finally. "It won't," she said. "But if it does, Thomas," she set down her cup, "I need you to trust me, the same way I trusted you when I walked into this house. Not because you're certain, because you've decided to." She held his eyes. "Have you decided to?" A long moment, then, quietly, "Yes." "Then let me go do this," she said. James Garrett's house was a modest property 2 miles east of Hallows Ford. Not poor, not prosperous. A man who had spent his life in the reliable middle of things. The kind of life that looked like contentment from the outside and felt, Clara suspected, like a slow hunger from within. Mrs. Hodge sat in the carriage outside without being asked. She had the instinct of a woman who knew when her presence would help and when it would obstruct. Garrett answered his own door, which told her something. No wife visible, no servant. A man alone in a house that had been built for more than one person. He was 60 or thereabouts, not what she had expected. She had built a picture in her mind, sharp-eyed, calculating, a man who wore his grievance like a coat. And the man in front of her was something quieter and more tired than that. He looked at her with the expression of someone who has been expecting a fight and is not entirely sure what to do with the absence of one. "Mrs. Waverly," he said. "Mr. Garrett," she said. "I'd like to talk with you if you're willing. I came alone. I brought no papers, no lawyers, no conditions." She paused. "Just a conversation." He studied her for a moment. Then he stepped back from the door. She let him speak first. That was the decision she had made before she arrived. She would ask one question, and then she would be quiet for as long as it took. Because the only way to understand what someone needed was to stop filling the silence with what you assumed they needed. "What was your father's name?" she asked. He looked at her. Something shifted behind his eyes, not suspicion, but surprise, as if he had prepared for every question except that one. "William," he said. "William Garrett." "How long did he farm the east parcel?" Garrett was quiet for a moment. 31 years, he said. "He came to that land before I was born. Built the drainage channels on the east side himself. You can still see them if you know where to look. He said that land was the best he'd ever worked." He said it simply, no performance, just the flat weight of a fact that had been carried a long time. When the Waverly estate absorbed those parcels, they gave him a settlement, a year's wages, as if 31 years of his life was worth 12 months. Clara said nothing. "He never recovered from it," Garrett said. "Not financially, but more than that. He stopped, the way a man stops when you take from him the thing that gave him reason to keep going." He looked at his hands. "He died 4 years later. I was 19. The room held the weight of that." "The letters from Prentice," Clara said carefully. "You've had them for 2 years. You could have filed at any point." "I know. Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a long moment. Because I kept thinking there had to be a better way, he said. That destroying the estate wouldn't give me back my father's 31 years. It wouldn't put him back on that land. It would just damage something, add another loss to a story that already had too many. He looked at her. But then nothing happened. And every year nothing happened. I got angrier. And finally, it felt like doing something was better than doing nothing, even if doing something was wrong. Clara looked at him. I understand that, she said. I understand it exactly. He studied her face as if checking whether she meant it. Apparently, he decided she did. What do you want, Mrs. Waverley? He said. You didn't come here to listen to an old man talk about his father. I came here because I think you want the same thing I want, she said. I think you want something real. Not a court proceeding that drags the Waverley name through the mud and ends with nobody holding anything of value. Not money handed over to make you go away. She leaned forward slightly. I think you want someone to stand in front of you and say, your father's 31 years mattered, and the way this land's history treated him was wrong, and we are going to correct it in a way that is permanent and visible and cannot be undone. Garrett stared at her. The east drainage channels, Clara said. Your father built them. They are still there, still functioning, still serving land that has been in the Waverley estate for 20 years. The man who built them has no acknowledgement anywhere. She paused. I want to change that. I want his name on something permanent. And I want the east parcel that borders what was his father's land transferred into a trust that benefits your family. Not as charity, not as payment for silence, but as a formal correction of an historical wrong, documented, public, and real. The silence stretched. You're serious, he said. I don't say things I don't mean, she said. Waverley agreed to this? He will, she said. I am telling you what I have decided, and Thomas Waverley and I have an understanding about how decisions in that household are made. Something moved through Garrett's face. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one. The surprised shape of a man who had walked into a negotiation expecting war and found something completely different. The letters, he said. Keep them, Clara said. Garrett blinked. I am not here to recover documents. I'm here to make the documents unnecessary. If we do this correctly, if what we build is real and documented and publicly recorded, then those letters are history, not leverage. They describe what happened. They don't describe what is. Garrett put his face in his hands for a moment. Not grief. Something more complicated. A man releasing a weight he had been carrying so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to put it down. When he looked up, his eyes were clear. Draw up the papers, he said. I'll sign them. She was back at the estate before noon. Waverley met her in the hallway. Actually, met her at the door this time, and she noticed that, filed it away, and looked at her face and read it the way he had learned over 7 weeks to read her face, which was carefully and accurately. He agreed, Waverley said. He agreed, she said. The east parcel and a naming agreement for the drainage channels. I told him you'd sign. She met his eyes. You're going to sign. Yes, he said, no hesitation. I'm going to sign. She nodded and walked past him toward the study. She had a great deal of paperwork ahead of her, and 4 days until Thursday. Clara! His voice stopped her. She turned. He was standing in the hallway looking at her with that face. The fractured face. The one with light getting through. And there was something in his expression that was past calculation, past the careful management of a man who didn't know how to be seen. He was simply looking at her. Thomas Waverley, standing in the house his family had built on complicated ground, looking at the woman who had walked into it 7 weeks ago, with one trunk and a list of conditions, and had proceeded, without fuss and without permission, to change everything. "I don't know how to," he started, stopped, tried again. "I am not a man who—" "I know," she said gently. "I'm trying to say something." "I know what you're trying to say," she said. "You don't have to be ready to say it yet." He looked at her. "What if I am ready?" The hallway was very quiet. The summer heat pressed against the walls of the house, and the house held it, the way old houses hold everything: history and silence, and the particular warmth of people living inside them with intention. "Then say it," she said. "I am grateful," he said, slowly and with full weight, "that it was you. Of every possible person in every possible circumstance that could have arrived at this estate, I am grateful it was you. Not because you're capable, not because you're efficient, not because you've handled every crisis with more sense than I've managed in years." He paused. "Because of who you are, the whole of it. I am grateful for the whole of it." Clara stood in the hallway and let that land. She did not deflect it. She did not minimize it. She had worked hard her whole life not to make herself smaller than she was, and she was not going to start now, not with this, not with him. "So am I," she said. "Grateful it was you." He looked at her with something open and unfamiliar in his face, something that had probably not been there since he was young enough not to have learned yet that openness cost you. And then he nodded, once, the way he always nodded when something was settled. And she turned and walked to the study, and he followed her. And they sat down together at the desk that had been his alone for years, and they got to work. Thursday came clear and hot. Robert Kane filed the land trust documentation at the county clerk's office at 8 o'clock in the morning. 3 separate instruments, all properly witnessed, all naming the Caldwell family, Harlan Voss, and the Garrett Family Trust as parties to a formal correction of historical land and labor arrangements under the Waverly estate. Delia Farnsworth's mother had signed as independent witness at 7:30 in the parlor of her own home, with Delia sitting beside her. Kane reported back to the estate by 10. Garrett had been at his clerk's desk when the papers arrived. He had read them. He had not filed the Prentice letters. He never did. The papers stayed in his possession. Clara had not asked for them back, and she never would. They were his to keep, a record of what had happened, a document that no longer had the power to destroy because the thing it described had been addressed. You cannot weaponize an injustice that has been corrected. You can only carry it as history. And history, in Clara's experience, was easier to carry than secrets. Margaret Webb's parlor hummed for a week with conversation about the Waverly estate's land arrangements. Clara let it hum. Let them talk. The papers were public record. Every word of the story was available to anyone who wished to read it. The wrong, the correction, the names of everyone involved. Clara had learned a long time ago that transparency was a better defense than silence. You cannot be destroyed by a truth that you have already told. The letter from Eleanor Caldwell arrived at the end of July. It had been forwarded through Kane's office, addressed in an elderly woman's hand that was careful and slightly trembling at the edges. Clara read it at the kitchen table, alone, in the early morning before anyone else was up. It was 2 pages. Mrs. Caldwell had written carefully and at length. She spoke of her husband, and the land, and the years after. She spoke of her daughters and their lives in Maryland, which were decent lives, she said, but different from what they had expected. She spoke of the morning she had received notification of the trust arrangement, and her daughter's reactions, and the particular, wordless thing that happened when something you had stopped hoping for arrived without warning. Near the end, she had written, "I do not know you, Mrs. Waverly. I know only what Mr. Kane's letter described, but I want you to know that whatever your reasons were, Whatever combination of justice and practicality and human decency led to this decision, I am grateful. Not for the land, for the acknowledgement. That is what my husband would have wanted. Not the land, the acknowledgement. Clara folded the letter and held it in her hands for a moment. Then she put it in her apron pocket and got up to make coffee. When Waverley came downstairs, she was already at the stove, and she handed him a cup, and he looked at her face the way he always looked now, carefully, accurately, with the attention of a man who had decided that seeing someone fully was worth the exposure of being seen in return. "Good news?" he said. "Yes," she said. She told him about the letter over breakfast, reading parts of it aloud, and he listened in the way he listened when something mattered, completely still, giving it his full attention. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You should write back to her," he said. "I will," Clara said. "I'd like to sign it too," he said, "if that's all right." She looked at him. "It's more than all right," she said. On the 1st of August, Nora came to visit. She arrived on the afternoon stage from Chester County with a small bag and her fierce 14-year-old eyes, and the particular expression she had worn since birth, the one that said she was evaluating everything and would tell you her findings whether you asked for them or not. Waverley met her at the door with Clara, and Nora looked at him the way a younger sister looked at the man her sister had married under complicated circumstances, with suspicion barely dressed as politeness. "Mr. Waverley," she said. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "We've been expecting you." "Have you?" she said. "Your sister mentioned you would be visiting. She said to put you in the East Wing room." "She said it was the finest room in the house," Clara said. Nora looked between them with those evaluating eyes. She looked at the house. She looked at her sister's face. She was a girl who had spent 14 years reading her family's emotional weather, and she was very good at it. Something in her expression changed. Not dramatically, just settled. "All right then," she said, and walked inside. That evening, after supper, when Waverley had excused himself to the study, Nora found Clara on the back porch in the warm August dark. She sat down beside her and was quiet for a moment. "You look different," she said. "Different how?" Clara said. Nora thought about it. "Less like you're carrying something," she said. "More like you set it down somewhere." Clara looked at her sister. 14 years old, and already she saw things that took most people a lifetime to learn to name. "I did," Clara said. "Is he good to you?" Nora said. Clara considered the question the way it deserved to be considered. Not quickly, not with the reassurance she might have offered just to stop the asking, but honestly. "He is learning to be," she said, "and I am learning what it means to let someone try." She paused. "That's its own kind of good." Nora sat with that. Then, "That's not a simple answer." "No," Clara agreed, "but it's a true one." Nora leaned her head against her sister's shoulder, the way she had done since she was small, and Clara put her arm around her, and they sat in the August dark of a Virginia summer, with the crickets loud and the night warm, and all of Chester County behind them, like a life that had ended correctly. The last piece of it came in September, when the elm tree on the east field boundary was marked with a small iron plaque. Clara had arranged it through the estate blacksmith. It read simply, "These drainage channels, built by William Garrett, 1783 to 1814. His work endures." She had not told Waverley about the plaque until it was finished. She brought him to see it on a Tuesday morning, when the September air was just beginning to carry the first suggestion of something cooler, something cleaner than summer. He stood in front of it for a long time. She didn't say anything. She stood beside him and let him have the silence. When he finally spoke, His voice was not quite steady. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," she said. "This wasn't in any of the agreements." "No," she said. "This one was just right." He turned and looked at her, and she saw it completely then. Not the sealed, shuttered man she had met in her father's parlor in June. Not the careful, distant man who had met her at the edge of everything and offered a transaction. But the man underneath all of it. The one who had been there all along. The one who had simply needed someone willing to stay long enough to find him. He reached out and took her hand. Just that. No speech, no ceremony. Just his hand around hers in the September morning. Holding on with the grip of a man who had learned, late and not without difficulty, that the bravest thing he would ever do was simply not let go. She held on back. That was how it was between them from that day forward. Not perfect, not easy, not the clean and transactional arrangement they had agreed to in a Chester County parlor in the summer of 1817. Something harder and more real than that. Something built from honesty and correction, and the slow, deliberate work of two people choosing each other not out of necessity, but out of recognition. The recognition that what they had made together was worth more than either of them had known to ask for at the start. Clara Whitmore had walked into Thomas Waverley's life as a transaction, and had refused, from her very first breath in his house, to be one. And in doing so, she had given them both something neither had expected to find. Not rescue, not redemption, but something better than both. A true and lasting beginning, built on honest ground that neither one of them would ever have cause to be ashamed of.